Thank you all for welcoming us here this morning. I did notice that our first hymn was a Charles Wesley hymn. Was that on purpose?
You requested it.
I guess it was on purpose then. Years ago on Mother's Day, when my children were really small, I asked my wife what she wanted to do, and she was like, I would like to go to the Botanic Garden so that the children can run free like wild animals, and maybe we can have some time just to talk and relax a little bit. And so because my children at the time were so small, we always brought with us Ritz crackers for them to feed the koi fish at the Botanic Garden. And I had not really been with them, and so when they began to open up the Ritz crackers and the crackling of the bag, these geese start coming toward us. And my wife says, oh no, here come those geese. And clearly from that line, that means like she has experience with these things. And so I was like, wow, like what's the problem? And she was like, those geese are mean. So the geese keep coming. We're standing on that concrete bridge that's over the pond, just like an inch off the water, right? And so as the geese get there, they begin to jump onto the bridge. And they turn right at us. And so I started yelling, get behind me! And my little troops just like got behind me. And even though I said it forcefully, and even though I said it with intense urgency, they knew that it was the voice of love protecting them from the demon geese. Because when you hear the voice of love and you trust it, it doesn't always have to sound gentle, right? It doesn't always have to sound tender. And so finally my children are all behind me, and the geese, it's just me and them having a stare down. And they don't know what to make of me because I get demonized too. And so they start taking aggressive walks toward me. And I started yelling, you shall not pass! But I didn't have a staff, so I just started kicking them. It is not every day that the modern urban male gets to defend his people from wild beasts. So I had to take the opportunity. To mix my metaphors a bit, in that moment I was both a good father, a protective Gandalf, and I was channeling the Karate Kid, all with a voice of love. In John's Gospel, Jesus has been mixing his metaphors throughout the entire Gospel. He has called himself the bread of life, the water of life, the light of the world. In John chapter 10, he calls himself two different metaphors, the good shepherd and the gate that lets the sheep in and out. But whereas we often think of these as tender images, and they are, I don't know that Jesus necessarily was cuddling sheep like we see in the pictures, but there was some tenderness there, right? A protectiveness to what he was doing. But there was this other side of it as well that didn't sound always super tender. In John 10, the shepherding metaphor is sometimes, in some of the verses, it sounds almost forceful and urgent, because he's critiquing the current political leadership of Israel at the time of Jesus' life. He calls them sheep stealers who are more invested in their own interest than in protecting the flock. He refers to them as hired hands who are more interested in what they can get from the role rather than actually being there for the presence and well-being of the sheep. And Jesus uses these metaphors to critique them and to contrast himself as a king or a shepherd who is marked by self-giving love and sacrificial protection. And understand, these critiques of these religious leaders are not just directed at a single group of them. There were at least three major movements within first century Judaism. The Pharisees, who we're most familiar with, they were not theological elites. They were lay people who were starting a renewal movement trying to get people to be faithful to Torah. Then you had the Sadducees, who were the trained priestly clergy elites. But their problem was that they largely were compromised or cooperating with the Roman invaders. And then you had the people who were trying to relive the glory days, the nostalgic days when the Maccabean revolutionaries overthrew the Greek Seleucids and established a Jewish nation, however briefly, celebrated every year at Hanukkah. All three of these groups represented different visions for national renewal, different ways of making Israel great again. These nationalist groups were diverse in themselves, but they were motivated all by genuine desires for faithfulness and survival under Roman occupation. And yet, despite what you could, even in your best, most gracious reading of them, despite their good intentions, despite their most faithful attempts to read the Bible or to serve God, Jesus seems utterly disinterested in their agenda. In none of the Gospels does Jesus convey any interest in restoring Israel back to some kind of national prominence. Never. Even in the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth," the word earth there also could be, and I think should be translated, land. Everybody would have known that what Jesus is saying is it is not the revolutionaries who are going to take back Palestine from the Romans and the foreign invaders. It is the meek. And every one of them would have understood that that's the most absurd thing that anyone has ever said, because meek people don't win wars. Jesus is contrasting himself against these other nationalist groups by saying, I have no interest in restoring the glory days of this nation or this particular plot of land. In fact, as John says earlier in John chapter 1, John tells us that Jesus created the entire cosmos, not just one nation. So because Jesus and God are concerned with the entirety of creation, God does not have a particular allegiance to just one group of people in that nation or in that world. You can imagine that people were often listening to Jesus talk about the things he talked about, and undoubtedly wondering, whose side is this guy on anyway? Have you ever had someone ask you that question? Just for asking critical questions. Whose side are you on anyway? Don't you want this president or this leadership or that? Whose side are you on? I love how the Pope has just been like, yeah, I'm an American. I'm on the side that doesn't want to kill people. Like, that should not be as shocking a statement as it is to Christians. I get it. We do have a historic doctrine called just war theory, but that doctrine is actually to give us a filter through which we view our wars, not to just justify anything we want to do. Jesus is not interested in propping up one group of people over another group of people. And if you want to get really detailed about it, the only group of people that Jesus seems to exalt are the poor, the vulnerable, the homeless, the hungry, and the immigrants. Those are the people that he regularly talks about. The question that you could ask of Jesus, whose side are you on anyway, it is exacerbated by the fact that he is constantly declaring that his mission extends beyond any one ethnic group or one nation.
His claim was that his kingship was not about elevating one nation above others, but was about forming one flock under the care of one shepherd. I think we Western Christians often miss this. We imagine Jesus as concerned with only our private morality or our inner spiritual life. We leave public life and the political realities to the authorities. But Jesus isn't teaching separation of the church and state in that way. Jesus is doing something much more subversive. He is saying that I am the king over every realm of life. There is no realm of life over which I am not king. Meaning, yes, I am king of your individual private morality and interior life. I am also king over all the other things that you want to keep me out of. Every dimension of human life, the personal, the communal, the spiritual, and yes, the political. His reign is a challenge to any system that reduces people to ideologies or treats them as expendable. His reign is a challenge to any system that reduces people to ideologies or treats them as expendable. And you don't have to be for one political party or another to succumb to the temptation to reduce people to your ideologies. Has anyone else read Omar El-Akkad's "One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This"? You all should read this. It won like a bunch of awards last year for Book of the Year. Omar El-Akkad is an Egyptian Arab, and he is writing about how he moved to America expecting religious freedom, that he had been told his whole life that America was this realm of freedom and goodness and beauty. And then he got here and he saw how we treat the poor, how we treat the immigrants, how we don't pay attention to the lives lost by our own bombs, how our media blinds us to the realities of our actions in the world. And he says, this is not at all the world that I thought I was moving into. And he said, you might think that I'm just criticizing Republicans. He was like, but what's the difference between Republicans who happily sign their names to a bomb, on a bomb, and take a picture, and Democrats who just initial that name but don't take the picture? The result is that people still die. Jesus' reign challenges any system that reduces people to ideologies or treats them as expendable. Consider, for example, that in John 10, Jesus says that every sheep has a face and a name. The thief doesn't care about the sheep's name, but the good shepherd does. Jesus isn't a telemarketer who's never interacted with you and calling you up and saying, yes, is this Mr. Fewhurst? The telemarketer doesn't know my name. I always know. I don't know that. First of all, I didn't ask for you to call me, but you could at least take the time to get my name right if you're going to try to scam me. Do you get lamers? Yeah. Jesus isn't the telemarketer. He's not the political junk mail addressed to current residents. He says the good shepherd knows the sheep by name, and the sheep know the voice of the one who loves them when they hear it, even when it doesn't sound gentle and tender, even when it's defensive and it's urgent. But notice the order, and I think the Presbyterians in this room will appreciate this emphasis. Notice the order here. First, Jesus knows their names. Second, they know his voice. The initiative is always God's. God always gets the first verbs. This reveals the very heart of the gospel. The heart of God is to give God's self away. This is what makes the good shepherd different from everyone else. There's no ulterior motives. There's no agenda. There's no manipulation. I exist in order to give myself to you. This is a reflection of who God was from the very beginning of creation in Genesis chapter 1, when God is giving power away, begins to create the world, and then gives the world itself power to create. Seeds so that they can produce a harvest, animals so that they can reproduce after each other, humans to reproduce and have dominion. God is giving power away. God is not self-centered. God gives God's life for the sheep. He lays down his life for them before they even know his name. And that creates space for them to respond. And this is where the Methodists should appreciate things. My favorite child and I, we like to watch pet videos together on Instagram. We'll cuddle up next together and we'll watch pet videos. And there was this video we were watching a long time ago where there was this dog owner in a kennel, and in this kennel was like 20 dogs. And they were all sitting there patiently. Which is not like a kennel experience. If you've ever been in a kennel, like that's not how dogs are, right? They're loud, but they're all sitting there patiently, quietly. And he begins to call them by name. And one by one, the dogs get up and obviously well trained, right? One by one, they respond to their name and they come. And you can't really tell what's happening until there's about 3 dogs left. And you see that there is one dog who is facing backwards like an idiot, just off in his own little dream world. And so the owner calls the other 2 dogs by name, and that dog is just sitting there dreaming off in his own ADD world. And then he says that dog's name. And it doesn't matter what la land that golden retriever was lost in. When he heard the voice of the one who feeds him and protects him and cares for him and loves him, he responds. It doesn't matter what previous mental condition he had been in, he knew and he responded with joy, his tail wagging as he comes off screen. That's a God-initiated invitation. Because here's the reality. Most of us spend a good portion of our lives looking in the absolute wrong direction. We wonder why God's calling everybody else's name, but we're in la land, not training ourselves to hear the voice of love. We hear the other voices, the voice of the thief, the voice of the hired hand. Any other voice that will give us a sense of identity or belonging. Because let's be honest, that's what a lot of political affiliation is. It's about my people were that, and so I belong to this. Any voice that will give us belonging. But underneath all of those competing voices, there is another voice, a voice that knows your name, a voice that spoke it before you knew how to listen, a voice that does not coerce or shame or manipulate, but calls, sometimes gently and sometimes a bit urgently, when the kind of saying, this is a voice of the one who is willing to lay down life for you. And when you hear that voice, even faintly, even if just for a moment, something in you was born to recognize it. You are free to respond. In our communion liturgy next door, we have this line that says, God, free us for joyful obedience. It's not a begrudging, shame-filled reaction. When you hear the voice of the one who loves you, you are freed to respond with joy for maybe the first time in your life. It arises from something deep in you that always knew you were made for this. So wherever it is that you've been looking off in la land, whatever voice has been shaping your sense of self, however distracted and distant you feel, it is time to learn to listen. Because the Good Shepherd is still calling even today. God didn't stop talking when the Bible got closed. The sound of that voice is always love that lays itself down for you.